I'm Wish. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the founder of Into the Orbit Consulting. More importantly, and more relevant, I'm the host of this podcast, Rain Bullshit. Rain Bullshit is a podcast where we throw out the patented, power-polished corporate script and we talk about the beautiful, messy parts of us that bring our whole selves into the workplace. Each episode, I sit down with a brilliant guest. These are amazing people. They're leaders, they're change makers, they're creatives. And we unpack their stories through 3 personal words. And they can be anything. No fluff, no posturing, just honest reflections, sharp insights, and a little bit of chaos. Rainbows and Bullshit was born out of a need for space. Space to unpack and honestly experience navigating systems that weren't built for people like us. It's about what it means to lead with integrity, to build inclusive spaces, and to do the deep, uncomfortable human work of change. If you're tired of surface level inclusion talk and you're ready for something a bit more real, honest and human, you're in the right place. So grab a drink, take a breath, and let's get into it. Morning! Welcome to another episode of Rainbows and Bullshit. I'm so excited, Meera.
I know, I can't wait.
So firstly, a big fat shout out to X4. It's a recruitment agency who are sponsoring the podcast and I have the privilege of coming to Blackfriars every Wednesday and meeting amazing people. And so yeah, if you have any STEM recruitment agency needs, they are your people. So, hi, my name is Wish, you know me. I'm excited to have with me in the studio today, Meera Somji. I don't do this, I don't introduce my guests, right? I kind of go over to you. So, Meera,
I know.
Tell people a little bit about you.
Well, it's such a pleasure to be here, and this location is incredibly glamorous.
Honour.
My name is Meera, and I am the co-founder of a diversity and inclusion tech company called Clusivity.
Love.
So I've been doing that for the last few years, but really my sort of wheelhouse, what I do is data analytics in the D&I space.
Love that. Love. Oh my God, love that. You've nailed that. Look, that elevator picture's down. Weird, Meera, as well. Like, obviously, we've only met each other like a handful of times.
I know,
but it is like it's a very familiar energy with you.
And I felt it immediately. And I don't know whether you want the listeners to know about the first time we met.
Oh no, we can talk about that because we're talking. You know what? Most of my listeners, when you explain that story, will be like, "Yeah, okay, that's good."
I mean, the truth is that I showed up to what I thought was a very professional industry networking.
Yes,
I treated it like, a sort of conference, really, little did I know that it was just going to be a night of cocktails in Soho with you.
God, and tequila
and dancing to Britney Spears downstairs. So I just had no idea what I was getting myself into. And from the go, it felt like I'd known you forever. And I feel so comfortable with you. So I'm glad it's mutual.
Well, listen, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for being so willing to come and have a chat with me. And yeah, I'm a big fan. I am a big fan. And do you know what's also weird, for those of you that know, like Emma Palmer, who is obviously one of my good friends, but also is very kind of known in the D&I space. It's like we were talking about this yesterday when we were on the phone, weren't we? It's so weird. So some of you will know, if you've listened to season 2, the first episode of season 2 was recorded with me and Emma whilst we were in New York at the end of 2023. And that trip was like it was just one of those trips that will always stay with me because, oh my God. I'm going to talk about New York because you spend your time there as well, don't you? I do. New York is such a special place, and obviously with everything going on in the States, and all of that kind of stuff, I was really glad I got to go before the election, I guess, before Trump came back into office. But when I was there, the reason oh my God, stop. They have an office dog. Are you okay with dogs?
God, yeah, absolutely. I'm okay with that dog. That dog is welcome.
So while I was there, I recorded with Emma, and me and Emma went together because she ran the marathon. And one day she was like, I'm meeting a friend for lunch. And you were the friend.
I know.
How weird is that?
How weird. We had a real sort of sliding doors moment where we almost met in New York, but it just didn't happen. But I also love that you just glossed over the fact that Emma ran a marathon.
I mean, absolutely, 100%.
But no, Emma's just been one of my biggest supporters. And as soon as I found out that she's not just a friend of the pod, but a friend of yours, again, just felt like this was very kismet and very meant to be.
Oh, well, it's so good to have you on the show. So tell me a little bit more about you, Meera.
Yeah.
So before we go into your words, which I'm really excited for, because of course, in the true data-driven spirit that you are, your words really bring to life a lot of that. But I want to know a little bit more about you. How did you how did you set up Clusivity?
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Well, it actually leads very nicely onto the words, because my first job was not too far away from this office.
Okay.
It was a management consultancy called Plural Strategy Group, right by Waterloo Station.
Okay.
And so I started my career as a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the sort of, a project comes along, a client needs to make a certain decision, and then a team of us are put on finding the data and evidence that they need to support that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was one of those jobs that was kind of late hours, hard work, but incredibly formative in how I thought about problem solving and how much I enjoy spending time with people, because you have to, if you've got kind of one of those jobs, you've got to really make the most of your colleagues.
Absolutely.
So professional relationships suddenly became very important to me, and also the way I would approach problems by, really trying to find compelling evidence and tell stories that would convince and persuade people to make a certain decision.
Love that. You seem that's really in your bones, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like it's not just because data is actually almost an overused concept at the moment. You're data driven, and we hear it, insights driven, blah blah blah.
I agree.
But you're really I can see it from how you talk. Like you're really thinking about how you're using information to create storytelling at the end of the day. And storytelling is so powerful.
Yeah, exactly.
You know. Exactly. So what was that like? When you were there?
So I mean, I really saw the power of it basically, and I don't know. Your listeners probably know this sort of joke about management consulting, but it goes, you pay a consultant to tell you the time, and they turn around and show you your own watch.
Right. Yeah. I mean, absolutely, 100%.
And so I saw the sort of, I saw that in real time. I was like, we are solving, or like we're answering questions that the business could answer themselves.
Yeah.
But it is actually very powerful and impactful to have an external person say, not only like, is this a time, but this is why you should believe it, and this is what you should do about it, and this is sort of what it means for you, and kind of to zoom out a bit. So I saw the power of it.
Okay.
I wasn't infused by the sorts of problems I was solving.
Okay,
do you know what I mean? And so hopefully we're going to get more, onto the where I moved to in my career. But it taught me how to really change senior leaders' minds. Mm-hmm. It just wasn't about the topics that I cared about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so that sort of slowly led to Clusivity.
Wow. And how long has it been now, Clusivity?
2.5 years.
Wow.
So not too long.
It's a known brand though. I mean, I know Clusivity before I met you.
How long have you been doing Into the Orbit?
God, good question. I started Into the Orbit as Wish Limited, because that's just the very vanilla way that I set up my business, really. I was like, just call it my name, and my name's pretty fun. So
I think it should have stayed that way. I love Wish Limited.
And that was 2021, so that was part-time, as in like a side hustle type thing, whilst I was working pretty big jobs actually. And then I made the very scary leap of going full-time in October last year. So it's literally just been over 6 months.
Oh, wow.
But my God, has it not been like it just feels like it's meant to be in all
I
the
love
right
the way
way.
you did it. Like, I do think sort of keeping it as sort of that side hustle, and then really taking the leap when you knew what you wanted it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're in a time, and you will probably understand this, because we did speak about this in our very cocktail-fueled interaction in freedom. We did talk about the urgency of the problems that we're trying to solve, and just kind of and that was a real driver for me, kind of going, look, I am ready to double down on this. I'm going to take a chance and make a difference. So I know I'm amongst good company here when it comes to the why. Do you know what I mean?
That is it. So that was sort of my kind of professionally where I was at, and then I was never sort of fulfilled by the impact I was having on what I was doing. I always really paid attention to the sort of inequalities around me, and who was given opportunities, who wasn't, and went away and did my master's degree in gender studies and labour market inequality. So basically I was really trying to understand, how is it that we've got to a kind of job landscape where people are so it's so stagnant. There is so little mobility and movement as to who can do what kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
And how did we get here?
Absolutely.
And why is it sort of so so stuck?
So, yeah.
And that's what I went away and studied.
Wow.
Again, that was that was sort of step 2 to Clusivity.
Love
is
that.
sort of bringing in the what problem could I solve?
I really want to do a master's.
Oh, do it.
I really want to do it.
I did it part-time while working at this, I'd moved into data by that point.
Okay.
So I did a 1-year master's over 2 years, part-time, and it was great.
Do you think I can do it without having a degree? Because I haven't actually got a degree.
I don't know.
Okay.
But
I've got career advice.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, there would be sort of like the Birkbeck universities and things that do evening courses, I don't think would require a degree.
Right, I'm going to definitely look into this because I've really been thinking about that.
Let's
recently.
go to some evening lectures together. I really want to get back into it.
Oh my god! Well, I would. I saw organisational psychology is something that I really have. Obviously, I've got
I would love to learn
experience with this,
organisational
but
psychology.
I think it's such an important skill right now to advance some of the measures on diversity and inclusion. So
okay, let's do that.
I'm gonna love this. I've got an invitation to go on evening lectures.
Because I miss it. I miss learning. I really do miss it. But you want somebody to go with you to actually
100%.
hold you accountable.
Absolutely.
So yeah, let's do it.
So tell me a little bit more about what Clusivity is currently doing. What kind of work are you kind of involved with your clients at the moment? Yeah, just give us a bit of a sense of kind of what the kind of things that you're kind of dealing with.
We've got a range of now software platforms that different clients use.
Right.
To essentially help them understand what is the level of inclusion within their organisation.
Oh, okay.
How well are they providing opportunities to everybody? Where do some of their employees face barriers and face bias? And so we've got some employee survey tools.
Right.
We've got some sort of demographic self-identification tools.
Okay.
We've got some sexual harassment risk assessments.
Oh, wow, okay.
We've got, we've just launched a leadership, cultural competence and confidence diagnostic tool. So it's all within this realm of kind of diagnosing where do the issues lie so that organisations know where to go.
I love that.
I
really love that.
So it's a range. It's a range. And we work with schools, charities, but also large corporates, one FTSE 50 company, big pharmaceutical company, big, lots of B2B media companies. So a real range.
Wow. I love that. A real range, but also using data and evidence to support kind of the case. So you love that you're not just, the heart is very much a big part of why we are who we are and why we do what we do. But I love that you're kind of almost using that as your ways to advance kind of, equity, I think, in the workplace.
Thank you for saying that. That is how I see it. I really know my lane.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? I know what I don't know.
Yeah.
I never get involved in sort of training or, organizational psychology or, the podcast that I just listened to from Rainbows and, do I say the full name?
Yes, I get this from all my guests. They're like, "Can we swear?" And I'm like, "You can absolutely swear."
My last Rainbows and bullshit that I listened to was about change transformation.
Yeah.
We don't really, dabble in that at all. What I know is how to ask the right questions in the right way to build a story that will change people's minds.
Love that. I really love that. And it's also doubling down on what you're, like you say, this is my bit of this is my bit. This is what I do. Yeah. And I think so many of us sometimes get so impassioned and emboldened with the whole, with making the world a better place that we're like, we can do all of this. And I think actually the fact that you're not doing that and you're like, this is what I can do. Yeah. I love that, because that's one of the things I'm really focusing on in terms of what do I want my consultancy or the support that I offer to do. And at the moment I have 5 kind of realms that I kind of support very broadly in. And they are really, all areas that I really kind of, have got experience in and can deliver. But I love that you found your niche, if it were, in terms of how data and insights can drive, and the right questions can drive behavioural change in organisations, because that's what will happen as a result of the work that you're doing with your clients.
Well, I love that. And that is true, I think. I have found my niche, but what it does is it makes it critical for me to know the rest of the people who are doing this work, because that's what I do. They then signpost clients.
Oh, absolutely, and it's all about the network, isn't it?
Do you know what I mean? 100%. So then I know there are people I really trust to continue the work in different directions,
totally.
To make sure that it actually, because data does only get you so far.
Yeah, absolutely. But you've got like a
it
great
changes
network.
the mind, but then you really do continue to need support to execute on it.
100%. Well, I'm so glad you're in my orbit, and thank you for sharing. Let's unpack this then. So I obviously asked you for your 3 terms that you wanted to talk about in today's kind of show. So let's go to evidence first. So tell me a bit more about evidence, what you mean by evidence and why you chose that word.
Yeah, so it does come down to that approach that is really part of my DNA, like you said, around how do you solve problems. And for me, you've got to find robust evidence that will help you make the right decision. And so evidence for me is around, not just trusting your gut instinct or trusting sort of people's opinions, but really justifying why is it that we're going to focus on this area or to make this intervention. So sometimes it's survey results and sometimes it's kind of, what the demographic makeup is of an organization. But I think why I like the word evidence is because it's not neutral.
Right.
There will be different pieces of evidence that everybody will try to bring to the table. Oh, we can't prioritize D&I right now because our revenue isn't high enough, or we've got to make budget cuts because of this other reason. Everybody's going to bring evidence to the table. So you do have to you have to learn how to use it in a way that is convincing to the person you're talking to. So that's one way that I think I find evidence really, really fascinating. Second of all, I feel like I've got quite a responsibility in the role that I have to use this, like you said, this data-driven, insight-led sort of buzzwordy way of talking to really make visible voices that are not heard. So yes, budgets may need to be slashed or we may need to make cuts. But if the clusivity data that I gather can say it's going to have, the plan that you're making is going to have a disproportionately negative impact on XYZ people in your population, or, actually our LGBTQ staff are raising higher concerns around safety in the workplace. Then your senior leaders can't ignore that. It can't be one of the things that they don't consider. So I feel like evidence is really powerful. And I've got a responsibility to use it to make voices and stories seen that otherwise wouldn't be.
So have you always, tell me about give me a bit more of the flavour of have you always been like that kid that would always have all the data and all the has that always been an interest of yours, or is that something that you've kind of grown into in terms of evidence is really it's a really powerful enabler of different things? Because I have evidence for me from an HR perspective. Is absolutely critical. And I'm saying this from a context of, HR has gone through an incredibly, really shift in terms of how we work and the way that we support. And evidence is at the heart of a lot of what, COPD and a lot of the professional accountability kind of things that we have is all about how we use data to drive impact. And that's what you said. But is that something you've naturally always had? Because I'm not naturally like I was shit at maths. I was really bad at all the evidence-y type kind of subjects at school. But is that sense that you had kind of an affinity with? So
such a good question. Thank you for asking that. I would say, I was always mathsy.
Right.
I was always into the numbers. Okay. So if we take me back, as a teenager, I was doing maths and physics, and I wanted to be an engineer. So
you're one of them. Yeah.
But then I didn't do that. I then basically fell in love with history and politics and did history and politics at uni. And I think that shaped more of why I pay so much attention to sort of who is listened to and what stories are told, because, as soon as you start sort of understanding how history is remembered in a certain way,
and who gets to tell that story?
Who gets to tell it? That's what really lit a fire in me, more than that sort of mathsy engineering side of it. So I've got it and I do like it, but I feel much more passionately about kind of what is said, what is unsaid, who gets to tell it and why.
But you've used your natural skills in like, physics and maths and data points.
I
and
do.
Understanding that in a very interesting way in the kind of with your passion, to bring your passion to life, right? So that's a really inspiring and empowering way of like seeing you and how you've evolved into the founder and CEO of Clusivity and the work that you do. So that sounds so exciting.
Well, I love meeting people who hate data, because it makes me feel like, okay, I really do have a role here, because I love massive Excel spreadsheets. I do love analyzing and pulling out, okay, what's this really saying? So it makes my day when I meet somebody who says, please God, don't ever, I will never.
You can fill a gap there, do you know what I mean?
There you go.
Absolutely.
There you go.
So that makes a lot of sense. So tell me more about accountability then.
Okay.
So in terms of that being your second kind of word that you wanted to focus on, and kind of bringing us from the evidence. So let's paint the story a little bit. So you go in, or basically evidence, as you rightly say, is the kind of, it shows you what you can't ignore it.
No.
You can't ignore evidence,
exactly.
right? So once that happens, so tell me about accountability. Why did you choose that word? And I guess what does accountability look like in terms of some of the work that you do?
You're right. It's the next step. It's the next step. I do see evidence as sort of the first step. You've got to bring what you think is sort of the important story for people to pay attention to, and hopefully, and what I've seen is you get a shift in the room where you get senior leaders suddenly, pointing at a number and saying, well, what are we going to do about this? And that leads me really nicely on to accountability, because once you've got that and you say, okay, we're going to introduce, a different policy, a new training, a new employee resource group, whatever it is, you then have to set yourselves, and that means we're going to improve that data point by X amount.
Okay.
And I think people make this harder than it needs to be.
Okay.
Like sometimes it is as simple as sort of, what is the inclusion score from a particular group going to improve by? What is our retention going to improve by? It's stuff that I think is quite straightforward, and we do much more complicated stuff in other parts of the business. We just so
why do you think that is?
I don't know. It's really frustrated me in the last few years that people throw up their hands and they say, oh, it's too hard to measure inclusion. 100%. It's too hard to measure impact of this. It's not.
Yeah, I know. It's really not. People are going to stay in your business and people are happy working with you. Come on, it's just...
You know what I mean? So, it's frustrating. It's frustrating. But I'm seeing changes, and I am seeing sort of... a little bit more of this sort of, it's actually not that hard. Let's treat the diversity and inclusion as importantly as we do other bits. And once you've got that sort of buy-in to do the work and to make a change, you use that consistent data point to hold people to account.
Yeah.
What I also like about accountability is that what I like to say is you're only accountable to your own employees and the people that work for sort of your organisation.
Right, as opposed to like that whole society.
As opposed to that whole society.
Yeah, because they feel a lot of pressure, don't they?
And listen, you might have other guests that sort of say it differently, but that's what I lead with. I say you're not responsible for wider societal change. You're responsible to the people who work for you and the people that you've made that kind of you have an obligation to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the data points we really focus on are, your employees' experiences and morale and retention and all of that sort of stuff. And I think accountability from that perspective helps leaders get away from being drawn into really politicized debates about DEI.
Yeah, I really hear that, and it's very aligned to the way I approach my work with my clients because, well, I am an activist, as you know, and obviously I'm very vocal about some of the issues that impact me, my communities, and particularly race and LGBT plus inclusion. But actually, in the workplace, I think we've lost our way a little bit because we've brought so much of that in-house that this is actually disengaging people from actually making a difference. So for me, I really hear what you're saying in the sense that with what I talk to people about all the time is bringing your best self versus your whole self in, which really speaks to this, doesn't it? Like in terms of actually you want to support the people who work for you to bring their best self to work.
Absolutely.
Because by doing that, they're going to work harder and smarter for you, and they will, you know, productivity will increase. But of course, that also means that you get to create the right environment for people to thrive in. And so really, you know, I think kind of focusing that macro issue of race and racism and all of the kind of, you know, and all the injustices that we know, you know, have kind of shaped our society today into that very micro issue of like, what can you do as a leader in your organization to move the dial from X to Y? So I really hear that.
That is gorgeously put, and I feel exactly the same way. I am at heart a complete activist. It's what I spend as much of my free time as I can, but I really show up to work, or, you know, try to, as much as possible, show up to work as, you know, as much as I can as a practical practitioner of diversity and inclusion. And I've got there through really learning from the people I respect, many friends of the podcast that you've spoken to, the Mabinti and Emma Palmers of the world, who really have shown me how this is done. And now you're in that list for me too.
I feel really proud.
You know, because it's true. It's why I feel so strongly about doing this, but I have to take a very different approach in the way I show up to work with clients.
I absolutely get that. How do you hold your clients accountable then? So obviously you've talked about accountability in the sense of like, you're not accountable for every black and brown person who lives in the country, right? But you are accountable for your workforce. So you've then defined what the accountability looks like, but then how are you holding leaders, clients to account? Are you, like, how does that work in terms of some of the work that you do at Clusivity?
So it's really sort of baked into the way we work with clients. So once we've diagnosed, okay, these are the areas to focus on in the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, sometimes each quarter, there is, you know, our dashboards update with whether they're on track. Sometimes it's sort of the yearly inclusion survey checkpoint. You know, have we moved the needle in the areas that we really want to? And so, it's sort of straightforward, you know, consistent check-ins and data points. That's one way. I think, secondly, I don't really know where I'm going to go with that sentence. I think secondly,
do you know what I think so interesting though, because accountability is your you don't no honestly, I think, do you know what it is? I think it's also because data is like, you can't hide from whatever your data is sharing. So accountability almost becomes quite straightforward, because you're like, well, actually, we're at 0.5, we want to move to 1.
It does.
So let's check in 3 months to see if we're between 0.5 and 1, right? And obviously, if they're not, then you don't have to say anything. You can just look at the screen and go, what's happening?
So one of the most powerful sort of dashboard displays that we have is kind of the employees, you know, join and leave analysis. Simple. Then once you've gathered kind of Clusivity self-ID data, you can see that by different groups.
Right.
And so quarterly or half yearly, depending how much, you know, how big your company is, how much movement you get, you can see very quickly, Whoosh, if your staff with a disability are leaving just as fast as they're coming, or whether, you know, you're within their first year of coming, you've got a first year attrition rate from your LGBT staff that is far higher than everybody else.
I hear you.
That I find one of the most powerful insights to hold people accountable. Ties into retention as well. So that's it's. I lay it out basically. I lay it out in black and white.
And you can't really hide, really, can you? So it makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about your final word, which is very much a word that I love that you checked this word in, and it speaks to some of the other themes that we've spoke about in the poddy. Courage. Tell me more about that. Why did you choose that word?
You know, my first 2 words were a little bit technical, a little bit, you know, very, very related to how I approach this work and the way I think I have an impact. Courage for me takes us a little bit more into the now and how I'm feeling in kind of May 2025 doing this. It's hard at the moment. The climate is hostile, and you know, the activist in me is breaking.
I hear this.
So the professional that I'm showing up to be is harder and harder to show up in that way. So I am seeking kind of courage in a way that I haven't been for the last 3 years. And I'm doing that through listening to as many kind of podcasts in the industry as I can, joining webinars, going to events, and basically really seeking and getting courage from practitioners in the space I really admire. So I think that's immediately what came to mind when I wanted this third word to be courage. Was, you know, I'm seeking that, and I'm asking myself, how can I play that role in the industry? How can I encourage others to keep going and keep doing this work effectively and bravely and consistently when it is becoming harder and harder? So yeah, that was my starting point with that word.
I really love that you're sharing this, and I know when people listen to this that so many of us are going to really resonate with what you've just said. It's a really emotional time. I actually have come away from like yesterday. I came away from social media for just to give myself a break, because I'm constantly reading about, you know, decisions that are being made politically, the impact that that's having. It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming.
It's too much. And so I think courage is it's a call to action almost, as well as a word, right? So what does courage look like for you? Like, what does the actions of courage for you, what would you describe those to be?
Well, I think, I'm putting myself out there.
I love that.
I'm, you know, since January, since Trump's executive orders came in, I was, you know, on the phone to a lot of clients and doing a lot of, you know, troubleshooting, sort of just solidarity building.
Yeah.
And that grew into building a community online, the Rise community, where we get together every fortnight for webinars with different D&I practitioners. So Mabinti's been one of those webinars, and so I'm putting myself out there and sort of building a community for the first time that I hadn't done. So that's one of the ways that courage is a way I'm trying to be courageous.
And it's amazing. Community is so important right now. So many of my guests have talked about the power of community right now in these very troubling times. So thank you for sharing that. For people listening who really want to perhaps work on and build courage, like, what advice would you give to listeners who are like, how can we possibly, you know, how can we work on our courage? What would you say?
Gorgeous question. I think.
I love that you call it a gorgeous question. I'm like, oh my God, I love that.
Gorgeous question. You know, I get a lot from learning about people who've done this before me in a range of different ways.
Okay.
So again, I sort of feed the activist in me by learning about historical activists.
Yeah, I love that.
And movements.
I love that.
And it puts this in perspective in a way that I find very, very helpful. Okay. So learning that there has always been sort of movements forward and then pushbacks against it has really helped me understand the moment that we're living through, and give me courage to keep going.
Yeah, understood.
You know, is there any what on your side? If I could,
I'm so I love that you're going back in history to reinforce. You're going back. You're looking back at the people, you know, because absolutely we stand on the shoulders of so many people who've done this work, or who, you know, are fighting for community and change and justice. And so I love that. That's a really, really great way of energizing yourself around it. It's a really interesting question that you've asked me at the time that I'm at right now with my mental health and where I am personally. I feel drained. I feel exhausted. I feel I've set up a D&I business. It's like, what kind of madness have I sat done and obviously I have the worries of, you know, not just the financial aspects and you know what the first year of being in business is like. It's incredibly daunting and scary.
Incredibly.
So I have to just dig deep for courage just to get myself through the day and be like, this is why I'm doing it, etc. I think for me, where I kind of draw my, if others would answer, maybe this isn't the best advice really, because I'm just basically just trauma dumping it.
Again, it's hard relate.
Absolutely. I think where I would say, you know, in terms of how I think about courage, there's a book by Susan Jeffers called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
Oh, I love that.
And I am a very anxious person. You know, which people find it, you know, interesting because they, you know, I project in a very, you know, in a very confident way, but I am, you know, I'm really anxious, especially right now. You know, there's a lot of newness happening in my life, and I think what I would say on that is feel the fear and do it anyway. If it feels scary, you're doing. If it feels scary, that's a good feeling. Like,
exactly.
I know
it's exactly what you should be doing.
Exactly so just go with it. And I would say plenty of self-care is so important right now. So if little creature comforts, you know, for me, like having a bath and time and taking time out of the day to come out of, so another thing for courage, to find my courage as well, I sometimes have to completely step away from the world.
Absolutely.
And because I get overwhelmed with anxiety, so I will spend, like at the moment I'm on social media cleanse. I will literally just gives myself some time to recharge. So don't think that it's not okay for you to step back, etc. Yeah, absolutely is. So that's kind of what I would say.
I love it, and I think there is a particular courage that you need to channel, and I have needed to too, which is when you are an entrepreneur and you are setting something up. So I don't know whether you have this in your family, but I come from a family of entrepreneurs. Like my grandparents they had a coffee shop in Nairobi where and it basically was, you know, my grandpa had done a bunch of different jobs. He'd been a policeman and he'd done sort of, and then when he when he worked his way up to sort of run this cafe, it changed the trajectory of my family's whole life.
Wow.
And it meant that they could then afford to migrate to Canada, and that's where they retired, and that's where my mum's family now all are. And I get a lot of comfort and reassurance hearing the stories of not just sort of wider historical movements, but the stories of my family, my ancestors. Do you have that? Do you share that?
Absolutely. So my dad,
100%.
So yeah, my family, I mean, I think I'm inspired by how much courage, to your word, my family had by even coming to the country. You know, my dad set up a business. I've had entrepreneurs in my family, my dad's side of the family, more so than my mum's, I think. But mum has had to come here, learn a new language, and raise 2 children in a world in a country where she doesn't have any family, doesn't have any children. I'm like, that if she can do that, I can do what I'm doing.
That is exactly what I mean, and it really, it's incredible. And I think, you know, it's the story of a lot of migrant families. And you and I, that sort of real courage, absolute a level of courage that you and I can't really relate to.
Absolutely, 100%.
So that I found that as well, and I think everybody, if they look back 1 or 2 generations, will sort of feel that way about sort of where they've come from. So
no, I love that, and I loved having you on the show. You've been an absolutely inspiring, amazing guest. Yes, it is. I know this is what I say this with every guest. I feel like I could do a whole day with the guest.
This was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. Well, listen, stay tuned for next week. And Meera, thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.